Hi, and welcome to Unity Gardens Cut Flower Arrangements video presentation. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the reasons that people might want to learn how to do flower arrangements or grow flowers at home. But the number one reason is the option to spread joy and create beauty. We love that you can give flowers to others, whether that is for a loving occasion, a holiday, or to share grievances and things of that nature to show condolences. We also can provide focal points to special occasions like weddings and baby showers, which is a very ambitious thing to want to do. But if it's a smaller budget and a smaller event, if you have those flowers in your own garden, it's very rewarding to be able to say, I did this myself. And it also allows you to have pride in the home. I like to say that, my grandmother in East Kentucky, she didn't always have a ton of money, but she would have a beautiful flower garden. And I just love the way it can brighten up the home to have a vase of flowers sitting on my table, even if I didn't have much else. And we here at the garden at Unity Gardens have a lot of flowers that are growing intermittently, like sunflowers, that you are welcome to take a few and take those home and put those into a small vase. Also, why pay money at the florist when you could potentially make an arrangement and show that kind gesture to who you're trying to show it to? Because that's the most common time we're at the florist, without the bigger bill. So we also sometimes enjoy the concept of bringing the garden into the home, because it expands that beauty into our daily life. So the history and significance. There are way more things than I could even possibly talk about in this presentation that have, historical significance when it comes to floral art. But I would say, here were some of the cool little highlights that I had found. In ancient Egypt, there was a lot of symbolism relating to flowers. And so it was said that the blue lotus flower was associated with rebirth and the sun, and red hibiscus was associated with beauty and youth. White jasmine was love and sensuality. And there were others. And commonly, this is, symbolism in flowers is something we still see. For instance, we all recognize the peace lily as a common flower for a funeral. And speaking of, ancient Greece, they would use flowers in ceremony and rituals. They also wrote a lot of mythology with very specific species of flowers associated with very specific Greek gods and goddesses. And there's, a lot of debate about what that symbolism means. And it's just kind of interesting to note that there was care put into flower arrangements and flowers in the garden, for, many, many generations. One of the most fascinating art forms that I found when doing research was ikebana, which was an early Japanese art form that may have been kind of the source of the vase and, arranging that we kind of think about today. There's a lot of beautiful tools like the frog, that I'll show later, that really are nice, for this specific topic. So, ancient China, there were flowers that were used on altars, and definitely a lot of, you know, symbolism placed there as well. Early dates, like I definitely was amazed to think about how much care must have gone into including flowers and religious ceremonies and other things of that nature, and how we really don't have much, of a different culture now. We kind of still do that to some degree. Roses are romantic, lilies are for grief, and there are others, but the best example I could think of is the birthday flower. So, not every family really holds on to this tradition, but my family does. My grandmother puts together a Christmas ornament for every child born that has their birth flower on it. It comes from Bronner's. But there's two listed here because apparently people can't make up their minds. I love that they're definitely a remnants of, Victorian England. And at that time, everybody was kind of fascinated by the idea of growing flowers year round too. So greenhouses were popular. So it was definitely something that carried on into today. There are still folks out here. I have a water lily Christmas ornament that's beautiful from my grandma. So, because I'm a July baby. Tools. Some basic things to know is that you should think about keeping things sterile. Consider them like dishes. You wouldn't want to start cooking in a kitchen with dirty dishes. So you may want to sterilize your vases and wash those. You may want to sterilize your scissors or clippers and keep in mind whatever buckets that you place flowers into as well can hold bacteria. Today, as we're talking about blooms and extending bloom life, really keep in mind that bacteria being introduced to the flowers and the water that you're keeping them in is the number one reason that your flowers will die sooner and will not last as long. So, sterile is the key. You're also going to want them to be rather sharp, your scissors or nippers, because you don't want to crush the stem. You would like it to be a clean cut so that when you're working with that flower, it doesn't have damage. So another tool that is nice is floral wire. Here, let me pause and I will show you some of these tools. Okay, now a little difficult to see. It's very fine, but this is a spool of wire. And a lot of the times what this is for wrapping around stems that aren't exactly as strong. And it allows you to kind of poke it into the back of the flower, wrap it around the stem, and put that down into floral foam, which I have not listed on my thing. Floral foam. Now, this is for more of a fake flower arrangement because it's a dry one. This one here, it's a little bit softer, but it is a wet foam. It's a little beat up. These are soft. They're meant to be soft enough that a flower stem could be pressed into them. The reason the wet foam is the best option for live flower arrangements is because you can soak them and they'll absorb water and help keep your arrangement alive. Um, a lot of times people will put that inside of chicken wire. They'll wrap up the chicken wire and then they can put the flowers into that and it kind of helps keep things, organized. Okay, so also floral tape, which I've got to look for here. Hold on one moment. Oh, here we go. So it is a very not sticky tape that is a green color and it's very stretchy. And it reminds me a lot of athletic tape that you would wrap your wounds in if you were sprained an ankle because it really only sticks to itself. It is amazing for making little bouquets and boutonnieres. If you're someone that is thinking about doing DIY flower arrangements, playing with floral tape and floral wire will probably be a great way to keep those flowers together. And it's kind of invisible against the flower stem, so it makes everything look nice and neat. You can also hide that underneath some ribbon if you make a bouquet to hold on to and you wrap it up really well with that. You can finish it out with some ribbon. Okay. Also, last but not least is, as I mentioned, a frog. So this is the type of frog that I have bought on Amazon for a couple dollars, and you put it on the top of a vase, and it basically sits on top of the vase, and you can place the flowers down in these holes, and it keeps them all kind of arranged nicely. There are many types of frogs, especially ceramic antique frogs that sit down usually in the bottom of the vase. Now, sitting in the bottom of a vase is something that looks like a scrubby brush, but it's not. It's a square frog. This is a plastic one. You can see the pins. So sometimes they're just called a pin cushion, but the metal ones are a little higher quality and they are, more expensive, but they allow you to stick a flower. Let me see if I can get an example flower for us quickly. Stick a flower in between the grooves and it can stand upright. This creates a lovely effect in a shallow dish that barely would hold a flower like a sunflower that's very heavy. So it kind of creates an illusion effect, which is really nice. And it's used often in Japanese style arrangements. Okay, sorry, I had petals everywhere. Now, moving on, we have flower food. Now, often when you buy flowers, you get a packet such as this. Here, you can see them. It is really a mixture of sugars and things that the plant can take up and helps the bloom last a little longer. This recipe came from the Martha Stewart website and is listed on screen. It just basically lets you know that you can combine 4 cups of water with 2 tablespoons sugar, 1 tablespoon vinegar, 1 tablespoon citric acid or lemon, and mix that all together and use that as a vase additive. Um, my advice is that if you do not wish to mix up flower foods and do all of that, understandable, I would just continue to change the water regularly. You really do want to change the water every other day, in my opinion. And it's more for bacteria buildup, and you'll notice the bottoms may become slimy. I like to start my flower arrangements out with a little longer stem than necessary so that I can cut a little off at a time and make it last a few more days if I feel like the bottom is getting yucky. Okay, so other ways that we can prolong the bloom's life. There's a lot of different needs depending on what type of flower you're working with. And I couldn't really talk about each specific one, but today I'll tell you a few facts that we have. Bulbs like peonies and ranunculus, tulips, those types of flowers, they do okay with arrangements that don't have a ton of water in the vase. Now, if you're mixing varieties, go ahead and ignore that because you're going to want to have enough water for all the flowers in your arrangement if you have a mix. But some flowers prefer just a little bit of water in the vase because they're really only soaking it up from the bottom. Poppies, fun fact about poppies, it will always make your blooms last a little better and your whole vase will last longer if you burn the end with a lighter or a match. Because what happens is you kind of cauterize the end and the milky sap that comes out of the poppies will not kind of leak into the water as much. And again, contaminating the water creates bacteria, and that is where your flowers will start to die because they'll break down with those bacteria. Also, please keep in mind that when you make an arrangement, we want to keep the leaves and stems at the bottom of the flower. We want to remove those. We want to make sure anything that is going to be touching the water doesn't have leaves. So this, I removed a few at the bottom. And what that does is there's less to be biodegrading into that vase. And again, change your water regularly. And lastly, as tempting as it is to put our beautiful flowers in a sunny window, avoid direct sunlight if possible, because it will keep those blooms kind of dry at the top and it will certainly end the bloom life sooner. The other thing to note here is if you're picking blooms, try to pick them when they are still young, but not when they're unopened. A flower that's unopened will not probably open in your vase. So this is a kind of trick that works really well for woody stems. I've seen it work very well in hydrangea, but this list I put on here was from an online source that we were looking at. Basically, what happens is if your flowers are wilting, especially if it's due to them being out of water temporarily, like if you pick your flowers and you don't put them in water right away, they can wilt on you. So if you can, put them directly into a bucket of water. But if that is something you're trying to experiment with, or you get a bouquet from somebody else that bought it at a grocery and you just want to see if you can perk them up, believe it or not, you take boiling water, put that down in a mason jar, a safe jar for hot water, and you're going to cut the stems angled. If you angle the cut, It's better for taking up water. So that's always a good idea, is to try and cut at an angle. And we're going to plunge those down into the hot water. Only about 1 or 2 inches need to be on the stem. We don't want to cook the whole plant. And you're going to leave that off to the side. And as that water naturally cools from boiling hot, it will steam the blooms, and supposedly within an hour, they will come back to life. If you don't believe me, Google the hot water trick, and you will definitely see some time lapses that blew my mind about flowers kind of coming out of the wilt. Okay, so let's discuss quickly vase fillers. So there are a lot of things that we use around our garden as vase fillers, but one of my favorites this time of year is mint, because as you can see, it's got these beautiful flowers. But even when it's not flowering, greenery is cheap and sometimes even free, depending on if you have a lot of things in your yard. We have a lot of beautiful grasses and things that are dried too that can sometimes be a great filler. As you can see on my screen, I have an X over baby's breath. Baby's breath is beautiful and it's affordable at a florist, but it is invasive and it is also a spreader. So if you decide to add it to your home garden, I would put it in a container and I would try and be aware that it will spread a lot of seeds. Because, yeah, if you can try to find an alternative with small blooms, like yarrow is a great alternative, Queen Anne's lace. We also see lots of beautiful arrangements that have other colors of small bloomed flowers. Um, it's really as creative as you'd like it to be. But I would say a vase filler is more bulk and less bang for your stem, but they're there to make everything feel robust and to add kind of a roundness, or even sometimes to shoot out and add texture and different sort of focal points for the arrangement, like especially dried seed pods. Those can be fun. So when it comes to the home flower garden, you're going to have to consider how you cut your home flowers, because if you cut them incorrectly, you're not going to get as many blooms. So I always tell people to cut above the node on a flower if possible. So I will try and show you here. This guy's a little wilty, but we have a leaf here, elbow, and I call it that. There's probably a much more technical name. But in his elbow is an itty bitty flower start. I'm really hoping I can show this to you. Hold on. Yeah, you see him there? Well, I have sacrificed that second flower by cutting this with enough of a stem that we could have a vase life for this guy, which he's reaching the end of at this time. But ideally, if you cut above that node and you leave that elbow area intact, you will get more blooms. It is species specific. Some are single stem, one and done, like hyacinth and tulip, and others sometimes bulbs. But things like snapdragons, zinnias, sometimes these sunflowers that I'm showing you, there's a lot of varieties that if you are careful about how you cut, you could extend your bloom life and receive more flowers throughout the season, because they'll often shoot out from the sides and create, twice as many. So also treat your flowers like a fish out of water. After you cut them, you want to put them down into a bucket that has water in it. I would consider choosing blooms that haven't fully opened yet, unless it's a species like zinnia that needs to be fully mature to survive in the vase. So if a zinnia is picked a little too early, it will get floppy neck syndrome, as we call it. I know that there's obviously a much more scientific name for that, but an immature zinnia will break off itself underneath the flower head, and it will be sitting like this in the vase. And you can salvage that with floral wire if you have to, because that it still has some life left to it and it's still beautiful. But ideally, wait for maturity for zinnias and do your research on what you have grown in your own home garden. It's very difficult to talk about all of them in one sitting, but there's amazing resources out there. I specifically really enjoy the Martha Stewart books that she wrote early in her career, because she breaks down a lot of detail on how to get the best life out of very specific species of flowers. But when you're cutting, just keep in mind too, cutting at an angle. Like I said, it helps with the water uptake. So another thing to consider is successional blooms. If you grow things basically for aesthetic all year round, you can have plants that bloom early, like crocus and tulips. You can move into the early spring with iris, and thinking about like early hydrangeas, and even into summer we get our Queen Anne's lace and echinacea, a million flowers, zinnias. And even in this moment in fall, or early fall, late summer, we're seeing sunflowers, we're seeing aster, we're seeing black-eyed Susan, and those will continue for the rest of the season. Now, what benefit does that have? First of all, you can help out all of the pollinators by having something available for a food source for them year round. That's always really nice thing. But a lot of people consider that kind of a side effect of having beautiful blooms for you, and for being able to have a vase if you'd like to, year round as well, for the most part. And so, for I would say a winter arrangement, which is still possible, you can get creative. You can use things like evergreens, you can use dried seed pods, branches. I would really suggest, though, keeping the oriental bittersweet at bay. If your heart is set on bittersweet, please try your best to find American bittersweet, and know that the source is true about that, like is being truthful. Because Oriental bittersweet, the beauty of it is the red berries, but those berries contain seeds. And that particular species is highly invasive, and it can choke out a lot of trees that are beloved, and we really don't want to be fighting bittersweet in our home properties. And lastly, I'd like to just tell you that you can have flower gardens that serve different purposes, and you don't need to feel any kind of guilt about that. Um, I recommend having flowers in your garden that are set aside for pollinators that are natives. You can have a few of those blooms for your vase arrangements at peak season, but really those, I feel, are better left out for the critters that really need those. They're keynote species. They allow them to lay their eggs, do many other things. But for what we've specifically discussed today, the cut flower gardening, there is nothing wrong with growing some European and Asian varieties of plants that you have in a nice contained garden, and enjoying those and cutting those. And there's a lot of benefit to getting outside and getting your hands dirty and trying out gardening, even if, it may feel bad taking a few blooms. I encourage you to experiment and to see if, there's something that you could grow in your home garden that would really excite you. Um, and especially if it's something that you want to plan for planting bulbs for spring. So tulips and many others. I should just off the top of my head thinking about tulips, but they would be planted this time of year so that you can enjoy them in spring. So crocus as well. So consider that, and I hope that we've inspired you today to make some arrangements. Oh, and before I'm done, I wanted to share with you all one of my life hacks for small flower arrangements. Small arrangements are beautiful, and coming into the spring, who has not received, a few hand-picked dandelions and violets from a child and thought, how am I going to put this in a vase? It's too small. I recommend everyone get a bud vase. Now, right now, I have some very significant flowers in my bud vase, but I'll be honest with you, even if I just had, I don't know, one thing in my bud vase, overall, the smaller the vase, the larger the arrangement appears. And so consider that. You may want to have something small on hand for when spring comes around and you're desperate to take in a flower, but there's just not much stem there to work with. I hope you've enjoyed our video presentation today. Unity Gardens is a free You Pick garden. We're here for all people in the community. Please come out and see us, especially this time of year when this is being recorded, which is August. And we really enjoy the sunflowers. So if you come, make sure to take a sunflower for a home arrangement. All right. We hope to see you soon. Thank you all. Bye.